Hey guys, tonight we are stepping straight into the biting wind of a Viking shoreline. Your feet sink into wet, gritty sand, the smell of salt and tar thick in your nostrils, and you realize you are very far from home. The longship you've just stumbled out of groans in the shallows, its carved dragon head glaring toward the horizon. Around you there's shouting, laughter, the thud of boots on wood, and 100 tiny sounds that all somehow say, "You don't belong here." So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been here maybe 5 minutes, and already you're in trouble. Not from swords, not from angry warriors, but from the cold. The kind of cold that slips into your bones, sets up camp, and sends little messengers to every nerve ending to remind you it's here to stay. You shuffle forward, trying not to look like a complete outsider. Your sneakers are soaked, your hoodie already smells like wood smoke, and your phone, let's be honest, is now a paperweight. A fisherman with a beard big enough to hide a small bird shoves past, muttering in Old Norse, which you obviously don't understand. Historians still argue whether an English-speaking stranger could have communicated here at all without months of learning, but right now, all you pick up is that his tone is not welcoming. The shoreline is busy. Women in heavy wool dresses haul baskets of fish. Children dart between barrels, and somewhere in the background a dog barks at absolutely nothing. You smell the fish before you see them, long, silvery bodies laid out on wooden racks, the salt in the air turning your lips dry. Your stomach growls like it's auditioning for the role of angry bear in a cave. You glance around for something, anything, that might qualify as food, but you quickly learn that in the Viking Age, nothing is free. Even a scrap of bread is tied to a web of barter, obligation, or family ties, none of which you have. One man gnaws on what looks like dried meat, and you try not to stare, but he catches your eye and raises an eyebrow, like he knows exactly how badly you want it. A couple of men haul a heavy net onto the dock, dripping with seaweed and flopping fish. Your modern brain screams, "Go help them, earn a meal." But the moment you step closer, you get a quick, almost casual shove back. Not violent, just a very clear, "This is not for you." The lesson arrives fast. Here, food is survival, and strangers are not entitled to survival. A cold wave splashes against your shins, and suddenly the longship's wet planks seem like a better place than this crowded dock. But you know you can't crawl back on board. If you want to make it through even a single day, you'll need to figure out how to get something to eat. You briefly think about offering your phone in trade, but remember, no chargers, no games, no TikTok. The thing is a shiny brick, and here a shiny brick means nothing. You trudge toward a cluster of buildings, low, turf-roofed, smoke curling from the gaps. The smell changes here, from sharp salt and fish to the deeper, heavier scent of burning peat. Someone is cooking. Your stomach, ever dramatic, lets out a growl loud enough that a passing child laughs. Inside the largest structure, the longhouse, it's dim, the only light coming from the fire pit running down the center. The air is thick with smoke, warmth, and the chatter of people sharing bowls of something steaming. You hover in the doorway like a nervous cat. The firelight catches on iron kettles, wooden ladles, and the gleam of oil on broth. A woman ladles stew into a carved wooden bowl and hands it to a man whose shoulders could double as doorposts. You step forward hopeful, but her eyes flick over you assessing. She says something in that rolling Norse you don't understand. You smile, gesture toward the stew, pat your stomach. She tilts her head, unimpressed, then points toward the door. You've been refused service, and your stomach drops lower than your pride. Out in the cold again, you realize this is worse than you imagined. Not just because you're hungry, but because the rules of this place are invisible to you. Back home, you could just buy a sandwich. Here you're going to have to earn every bite, and you have no idea how. Somewhere beyond the longhouse, the hills rise green and gray, dotted with sheep and rocky outcrops. It's beautiful, in a postcard you can't afford kind of way. But beauty doesn't fill your belly. And as you turn toward the shore again, hoping to find some work or at least some scraps, you have a horrible thought. If you don't figure this out soon, you might not last until nightfall, let alone the week. The longhouse door thuds shut behind you, muffling the voices and the smell of stew like a cruel magic trick. Outside, the wind finds every gap in your clothing, threading icy fingers down your back. You take a deep breath, trying to think, trying not to imagine that bowl of stew just sitting there, cooling by the fire. Survival, you tell yourself, is just problem solving with higher stakes. And right now the problem is that you're standing in a world where the currency isn't money, it's usefulness. You look down at your hands, soft, a little pale, not exactly Viking approved for manual labor, no sword, no axe, not even a decent callus to your name, but your stomach doesn't care about your resume. You wander toward the dock again, figuring maybe someone will let you help unload a boat if you look eager enough. A group of men are rolling barrels off a low-sided cargo ship, the heavy wood thumping onto the planks. You wave, smile, and step in to help, only to be met with that same firm, almost bored shove you got earlier. No yelling, no threats, just a look that says, "You're not part of this." Historians still argue whether Viking communities were truly closed to outsiders or just cautious with strangers. In this moment, you're voting for closed. The hunger's getting worse. It's no longer just a hollow in your stomach. It's a low throb in your skull, a fuzziness in your thoughts. You pass a fish rack again and actually consider swiping one. But the fish are strung high and tight, and besides, there's a boy sitting nearby with a small knife and the kind of watchful eyes that don't miss much. You drift toward the edge of the settlement where the houses thin out and the grass begins to take over. Here the smells are different, less smoke, more earth. You spot chickens pecking in the dirt, scratching for bugs. You try to imagine catching one, then remember you've never actually caught a live chicken in your life. A nearby goat eyes you with suspicion, as if it knows you've been downgraded from tourist to possible predator. Finally, you sit on a smooth boulder, the wind snapping at your hair. From here you can see the fjords stretch out in both directions, the water glinting under a pale sun. It's beautiful, yes, but there's a gnawing irony in sitting in such a postcard-worthy place while seriously considering eating grass. A shadow falls over you. You look up. One of the bearded fishermen is standing there, the same one who shoved past you earlier. He says something in Norse, jerks his head toward the longhouse, then points at a wooden bucket in his hand. You blink. Then it clicks. He wants you to carry water. You leap up, nearly dizzy with relief. Carry water? You can carry water. It's practically the most basic human task. You take the bucket and follow him down to the shore. The cold water seeps through your shoes instantly, but you don't care. You dip the bucket, haul it up, slosh half of it onto your legs, and trudge back toward the longhouse. The man takes it without a smile, but without a shove either. Progress. He gestures for you to follow him again. You repeat the trip, your arms starting to ache by the fourth run, but the rhythm of it warms you a little. On the sixth run, you step inside the smoky warmth of the longhouse and see the woman from before. She glances at you, then at the fisherman, then, miracle of miracles, ladles a small portion of that stew into a wooden cup and hands it over. You don't ask what's in it. You don't care. It's hot, salty, and vaguely meaty. There's something chewy that could be fish, or could be root vegetable, or could be rat. You eat it anyway, spoon scraping the bottom before you've even realized you're done. Your first Viking payday is gone in under a minute, but it's a start. You hand back the cup, nod in thanks, and step outside again, the wind biting, but your stomach at least temporarily silent. You've survived your first night in the Viking age, barely. But as you walk back toward the boulder, you already know, tomorrow, you'll have to find a new way to eat. And the day after that, another way still. This place runs on constant effort, and if you want to last, you'll have to keep moving, or risk being left behind entirely. The first rays of sunlight don't so much greet you as stab you in the eyes. You wake to the sound of boots on dirt and the faint creak of wooden wheels. The longhouse door stands open, spilling out that warm, smoky air you're starting to crave, but you're not inside. you're curled up in your damp hoodie behind a stack of firewood. The stew from last night bought you a few hours of rest, but now your stomach is staging a full protest. You stand, stiff and slow, rubbing the sleep from your face. The village is already awake. Women in aprons are hanging fish to dry. A couple of men are heading toward the fields with hose slung over their shoulders, and somewhere in the distance, a hammer is tapping steadily against wood. Your plan for today is simple. Find a job, earn food. It's the same plan as yesterday, and you've already noticed a flaw. It's hard to compete with people who've been doing these jobs their entire lives. But you've got two advantages: stubbornness and a willingness to embarrass yourself. You make your way to the longhouse, where a woman is scraping ashes from the fire pit into a clay jar. She doesn't notice you at first, and you almost turn to leave, but then she looks up, points to a pile of tools near the door, and says something in a tone that could mean help yourself or don't touch anything. You decide to take the risk. You pick up what looks like a broom but turns out to be a bundle of twigs lashed to a stick. She points toward the floor, and you start sweeping. It's not elegant. The twigs snag on every bump in the planks, but it gets the job done. A couple of kids giggle at you, and one mimics your sweeping motion, except they're about 3 times faster. When you're done, the woman nods once and hands you a piece of bread. It's flat, hard, and looks like it might be older than you are. But it's food, and you bite in without hesitation. The taste is bland, but your brain throws a little party anyway. Historians still argue whether Viking bread was made purely from barley or mixed with oats and other grains. Whatever this is, it's gritty enough to suggest there's a bit of dirt in the recipe too. You eat every crumb. By mid-morning, the bread is gone, and the hunger is back like a bad sequel. You wander toward the outskirts of the settlement, where a few people are mending nets. A younger man waves you over and gestures to a tangled mess of rope. You squat down, trying to help untangle it, but your modern fingers fumble the knots. After a few minutes, the man sighs, takes the net back, and gestures toward the shore. You follow, wondering if this means you're getting a chance to fish. The answer is yes, sort of. You're handed a long pole with a hook, shown how to angle it into the shallows, and left to your own devices. The water is shockingly cold. Your toes go numb almost instantly, and you realize this is going to take patience you don't have. An hour passes, then 2. Finally, something tugs at the line. Your heart jumps. You haul it in, triumphant, and find yourself staring at a stick. Not even a straight stick. The fisherman laughs, claps you on the back hard enough to jolt your teeth, and takes the pole from you. He tosses you a small, salted fish, more pity than payment. But you're in no mood to complain. You eat it right there on the shore, salty brine dripping down your chin. The rest of the day blurs into little tasks. Carrying bundles of firewood, fetching water again, trying and failing to split logs. Each job earns you a scrap, half an apple here, a spoonful of porridge there. It's not enough to feel full, but it's enough to keep you moving. As the sun dips low, painting the fjord gold, you slump onto your now familiar boulder. The hunger hasn't gone away. It's just quieter for the moment. You've learned one thing, though. Surviving here isn't about finding one job. It's about stringing together a dozen tiny victories, each one just enough to get you to the next sunrise. And as the wind picks up, carrying the smell of roasting meat from somewhere deeper in the village, you know tomorrow you'll be right back at it, hunting for your next bite like every other creature in this place. By the 4th day, desperation has a taste. It's metallic, sour, and sits heavy in your throat. Your stomach doesn't bother with polite grumbles anymore. It growls like a wild animal you've accidentally swallowed. The scraps you've been living on aren't cutting it. You've had bread so hard you could use it as a weapon, fish that tasted more like seawater than food, and one questionable turnip that seemed halfway to becoming soup on its own. This morning you try a different tactic, shadowing the hunters. You spot 3 of them heading into the trees, each with a bow and a quiver of arrows. You follow at a distance, hoping they won't notice or won't care. The forest swallows the village noise quickly. Here, the only sounds are crunching leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. The hunters move silently, which makes your modern sneakers sound like drum beats. After a few minutes, one of them turns, raises an eyebrow, and jerks his head toward a fallen log. You take the hint and sit. He disappears into the trees, and you're left with a front row seat to nothing in particular. Time drags, your stomach tightens, you start thinking about what you'd be willing to eat, and the answer list is expanding fast. At first you pictured a perfectly roasted haunch of venison. Now, you'd settle for anything that moves slower than you do. Then there's movement, a rustle in the undergrowth to your left. You freeze. Something small scurries into view. It's a rat. In your old life, the sight would have sent you 2 steps back and a shiver up your spine. Now it looks edible. You don't even have a weapon, just your hands and a rock nearby. You grip the rock, waiting for the rat to come closer. Your heart is pounding, not from fear, but from the idea of finally getting a solid mouthful of protein. The rat pauses, sniffing the air. You throw. You miss. Badly. The rock bounces off a root, and the rat bolts into the brush. You curse under your breath and slump against the log. By the time the hunters return, empty-handed, you've decided rat hunting isn't as simple as cartoons made it look. Still, the thought sticks in your mind. If it comes down to it, and you're starting to believe it will, you'll eat whatever you can catch. That night, as you gnaw on yet another piece of bread the size of a playing card, you overhear something. 2 villagers are talking near the fire. You can't make out every word, but you catch enough to guess. They're discussing the stores of dried meat and fish kept in a shed near the docks. Your brain starts turning over possibilities. The hunger is wearing down your moral compass, smoothing off the edges until stealing from a Viking doesn't seem insane, just logical. You push the thought aside for now. Tomorrow you tell yourself you'll find a better way. But deep down, you know that if better doesn't show up soon, you might be crouching behind that shed with sticky fingers and a guilty conscience. 5 days, you think, is the limit. After that, anything that moves is fair game, and that includes the rats. Day 5 breaks with a frost so sharp it bites your nose before you've even left the longhouse. You wake to the sound of people arguing outside, something about the fishing nets. You don't care about the details at first. All you care about is the gnawing in your stomach, a dull pain that's been constant since you arrived. The nets, it turns out, are torn, badly. One of the older fishermen swears it's sabotage. Another blames seals. You're standing nearby, hands shoved into your cloak. When it hits you, you know how to fix this. Not because you've ever mended a net before, God no, but because you've seen 100 YouTube videos about knot tying, survival skills, and the weird niche hobby of bushcraft. You kneel beside the torn ropes, fingers stiff in the cold, and start working. It's awkward at first. Viking twine is rough, and you keep pricking your hands. But the logic is simple. Strong loops, even tension, no frayed ends left loose. The fishermen crowd around, skeptical, muttering under their breath. By the time you're done, you're sweating under your layers, but the net is whole again. They tested in the water that afternoon. It holds. The next morning, the catch is bigger than they've seen all week. That's the first time anyone in the village looks at you like you're not just some lost, half-starved stranger. From there, things start to shift. You teach a woman how to store fish in layers of ash to keep it from rotting so quickly, a trick you remember from a survival forum. You show a carpenter how to make a simple clamp from a split branch to hold planks steady while he works. You even help one of the kids rig a crude rabbit snare. None of these things are revolutionary to you, but here, they're the kind of small improvements that make people's lives easier. And in a place where everything is hard, easier is as valuable as gold. By the end of the week, you're eating better. Not feasts, but enough to quiet the beast in your stomach. A slice of smoked fish here, a chunk of bread there, always because there's extra, never because you earned it. But you can tell the difference. And the rats. You stop thinking of them as potential meals. Not because you're above it now, but because you no longer have to. Still, you know the truth. You didn't survive these first days on strength or skill alone. You survived because you kept your head down, used what you knew, and proved you were worth keeping alive. For the first time since arriving, you go to sleep without counting the hours until morning. You've carved out a space for yourself here, not with muscle, but with ideas. And in the Viking age, that might just be enough to keep you alive. It's strange how quickly hunger gives way to habit. A week ago, you were ready to gnaw on the leg of a passing chicken. Or, let's be honest, the chicken itself. Now, you actually have the energy to stand upright without swaying. Your hands have stopped trembling from weakness, which means you can finally start thinking about more than your next meal. The village is still wary of you, of course. You're an outsider, a stranger who talks funny and doesn't seem to know the first thing about how to swing an axe. But you've patched their nets, stored their fish better, and fixed more than one crooked hinge on the longhouse doors. People remember that. One cold morning, the chieftain's wife, tall, sharp-eyed, and with the kind of presence that makes even the burliest warriors stand straighter, calls you over. A loom is giving her trouble. The warp threads keep loosening, and she's losing precious hours retightening them. You glance at the setup, and your modern brain starts whirring. Friction points, angles, tension. You suggest running the threads through a loop of softened leather before they hit the beam. It's such a simple adjustment, she looks almost offended that she didn't think of it herself. But when she tries it, the problem vanishes. From that moment, her opinion of you changes. In a Viking settlement, the chieftain's wife's opinion is basically social currency. You notice it the next day when the blacksmith greets you with something dangerously close to warmth. The blacksmith, as it turns out, is nursing a problem too. His bellows keep leaking air at the seams, and repairs don't last. You suggest lining the seam with a paste of ash and animal fat, a sealant trick you recall from a historical reenactment documentary you half-watched while eating instant noodles years ago. He tries it. It works. Within a few days, you've become the village's unofficial fixer of odd problems. A squeaky door hinge. You smear it with fish oil. A child's sled keeps tipping. You shift the runners a few centimeters inward. None of this makes you a warrior, but in a place where every scrap of efficiency can mean the difference between survival and loss, it makes you valuable. Valuable enough to earn invitations. You start being called into the main hall during meals. At first, it's just so they can interrogate you for strange stories of your homeland. You keep your answers vague. The last thing you need is to explain airplanes or TikTok to people who think lightning is Thor throwing a tantrum. But then you're there when they're discussing fishing spots, wood shortages, trade routes. You don't make decisions, but people start looking at you when they talk. Historians still argue whether Viking society valued cunning as much as brute force. You're living proof that, at least in this village, brains can buy you breathing room. And with breathing room comes an uncomfortable realization. You're no longer just surviving here, you're positioning yourself. It's not power in the sword-swinging sense. You're not the guy they send into battle. But people listen when you speak, and sometimes, they follow your suggestions without argument. You didn't plan this, but then again, no one plans to be dropped into the 9th century. The nights are still cold, the food is still rough. But now, when you pass someone in the village, you notice them nod in recognition, not as a stranger, not as a burden, but as someone who belongs, just enough to matter. And that, you think as you lie awake under your scratchy wool blanket, is a kind of strength the Vikings themselves might respect. By the start of the 2nd month, you've stopped flinching every time someone slams a door or drops an axe behind you. That alone feels like a victory. The village no longer treats you like a passing oddity. They've quietly decided you're part of the scenery. But survival here is a moving target. The weather has turned meaner, the wind carving across the fjord like a blade. The fishing boats come back with fewer cod, the game traps are sometimes empty for days. And while you've carved out a place as the village's problem solver, that title won't mean much if everyone is too hungry to care. That's when you remember something from an old survival blog, something about preserving calories by storing food in the ground where the temperature stays steady. You pick a patch of earth just above the high tide mark, dig a narrow pit, and line it with seaweed to keep moisture in. Then you convince a few skeptical fishermen to try storing their extra catch there instead of salting it all immediately. The fish doesn't rot. In fact, when they dig it up 3 days later, it's firm and fresh enough to eat. That small success snowballs. You find yourself experimenting, loosely weaving baskets from willow shoots to keep root vegetables off damp soil, hanging strips of seal meat near the chimney so they dry without burning. These aren't miracles, but they're enough to stretch the food supply. And in a place where the line between full stomach and famine is razor thin, that makes you suddenly indispensable. Which is why, one icy evening, you're summoned to the longhouse by the chieftain himself. He's a big man with a beard like a frozen waterfall, and you've never been this close to him without at least 3 people between you. He doesn't sit you down, he doesn't even greet you, he just points at a wooden chest and says, "Open it." Inside, wrapped in layers of wool, is a silver arm ring, thick, heavy, and carved with knotwork so fine it seems alive. You've seen Vikings wear them in the village, but you know enough history to realize what's happening. This is a gift of trust, a sign you've been brought into his circle. Your hands shake as you lift it, not from fear, at least not entirely, but from the weight of the thing. It's not gold, it's not a sword, but it's power. "Now," the chieftain says, "you help me." We keep the village strong, and that's how it happens. One moment you're gnawing on scraps, fantasizing about eating anything that moves. The next, you're standing in a smoky hall wearing silver that marks you as something more than a stray washed up from nowhere. Of course, power here is never safe. It draws attention, questions, maybe even enemies. But for now, you slide the arm ring over your wrist, feel its cold bite against your skin, and think, I might actually make it here. At least until the next problem comes crashing through the door. Power in a Viking settlement isn't a crown you wear, it's a torch you carry through a house full of dry straw. It lights your path, sure, but it also makes you very, very visible. At first, your new status is intoxicating. People greet you by name, they listen when you speak, they even bring you small gifts, a carved wooden spoon, a pouch of dried berries, a fur scrap for your sleeping mat. But then you notice the sideways glances, long enough to measure you, short enough to deny if challenged. It starts with the boat builders. You'd once spent hours quietly learning from them, fetching nails and holding planks steady. Now, when you suggest a slight improvement to the hull shape, they smile tightly and change the subject. Later you hear one of them mutter, "Not born here, doesn't know the sea." Then there's Gunnar, a broad-shouldered farmer who is always friendly, until the chieftain began asking you for advice on winter stores instead of him. One morning, you find that someone has accidentally tipped over your food storage pit. The seaweed lining is ruined, the fish gone. The message is clear. You've stepped on someone's pride. The chieftain warns you in his own way. "Wisdom makes a man valuable," he says over a bowl of hot broth. "But value makes a man dangerous to others. Don't forget, here, a knife doesn't care if it finds your back, so you adapt. You share credit for every idea. You forget to correct people when they improve your methods and call them their own. You make a point of joining fishing trips and hauling nets until your hands blister, just to prove you're not above their work. Still, tension simmers beneath the surface. In the smoky longhouse, you sometimes catch the glint of eyes on you, calculating, weighing, waiting. The same knowledge that once saved you from starving is now the same thing that could get you driven out, or worse. And yet you can't go back to being invisible. You've tasted safety, influence, even a little respect. Now you understand the real challenge of surviving here, not just finding food or warmth, but keeping your place in a world where everyone is always measuring your worth, and whether you're worth the trouble to keep alive. One night, as the winter winds howl outside, you sit by the hearth, turning the silver arm ring on your wrist. It feels heavier than it did the day you received it, because now you know what it truly costs. It happens on a night so cold the sea itself seems to shrink away from the shore. The wind howls through the settlement like a restless spirit, rattling shutters and slamming loose doors. You're huddled under your fur, nearly asleep, when you hear it. Shouts outside, urgent and overlapping. You push open the longhouse door and are hit by a blast of freezing air. Torches bob in the darkness. A group of men is already running toward the beach, weapons in hand. You catch a single word in their panicked voices. Raiders. Your stomach twists. You've heard the stories. Lightning-fast coastal attacks, houses burned, people taken as slaves. You're not built for fighting, and you're certain your modern-day gym sessions, if we're being honest, occasional at best, won't save you against men who've been swinging axes since they could walk. But something inside you won't let you just hide. Maybe it's survival instinct, maybe it's stubborn pride. You grab a torch and follow, boots crunching through icy snow. Down at the shore you see them, a black silhouette of a ship in the moonlight, moving fast toward the beach. Your own settlement's warriors are forming a loose line, shields out, voices raised in a chant, meant to scare the enemy. And then you realize you've seen something they haven't. The tide. It's low enough that the raider's boat will hit the sandbar before it reaches shore. You rush to the chieftain, breath puffing in frantic clouds, and explain. At first he squints at you like you're talking nonsense, but then the first dull thunk of wood on sand echoes across the water. His eyes widen. With a barked order, half the warriors sprint down the beach, circling to flank the stranded ship before the raiders can jump out. The fight is short and messy, snow churned with footprints, steel clashing in the dark. You keep low, throwing handfuls of sand in the eyes of anyone who gets too close. It's not heroic, but it works. By dawn, the danger is over. The raiders are gone. Some fled, some captured, and your people are still standing. You expect to be thanked quietly, maybe given a nod. Instead, the chieftain stands before the whole settlement, raises your arm and says, "This one saw what we did not. This one saved us." The cheer is loud enough to echo off the frozen hills. Even Gunnar, who hasn't looked you in the eye for weeks, claps you on the shoulder. For the first time since arriving in this strange world, you feel like maybe you belong. But later, alone in the dim light of the longhouse, you wonder, was it luck or the start of something more dangerous? Because in the Viking Age, being noticed by everyone isn't just a gift. It's also an invitation for fate to come looking for you. By the next morning, your name is still buzzing on everyone's lips. People greet you differently now, fewer side glances, more nods of approval, even a hint of deference. You're offered a seat closer to the fire during meals, which in Viking social terms is basically an upgrade from background extra to recurring character. But fame is a fickle gift. It's barely midday before someone suggests you join the next hunting party. You try to explain, again, that you're not exactly built for sprinting through forests with a spear. They just laugh. You killed no man, yet you outwitted a ship of them. Surely you can find a deer. And so, you find yourself trudging through knee-deep snow, following tracks that look suspiciously like your own boot prints. The others are silent, focused, their breath hanging like ghosts in the frozen air. You, meanwhile, are praying you don't sneeze and scare off everything within a mile. Hours pass before you spot movement. A hare, darting between snow-covered roots. It's small, quick, and let's be real, not exactly the stuff of heroic feasts, but your stomach remembers the gnawing hunger of your first week here, when even the idea of roasted mouse seemed reasonable. You raise your borrowed bow, pull the string too far, and snap. The bowstring whips your arm, and the hare bolts into the woods. The others smirk, but no one mocks you outright. In Viking society, even a failed attempt at providing food earns some respect. Still, you're determined not to go back empty-handed. That's when you remember a trick from a survival show back home, one you'd half ignored while scrolling on your phone. You start fashioning a simple snare from a strip of rawhide. The others watch curiously, then wander off, unconvinced. An hour later you return to the spot and, miracle of miracles, there's a plump hare caught neatly in your trap. They bring it back to the settlement with you, not laughing anymore. In fact, one of the older hunters asks you to show him how you made it. The fact that a man who can track a moose through a snowstorm wants your advice is enough to make you sit a little taller at supper. Historians still argue whether Viking communities truly valued cunning as much as strength, but tonight it feels like the answer is yes. Over roasted hare and the rich, fatty broth they cook it in, you notice the chieftain watching you, not in suspicion, but in calculation. It's the look of a man wondering how else your strange knowledge might be useful. And you can't help but wonder the same thing. You've survived hunger, the cold, even raiders. Maybe you're not just getting by anymore. Maybe you're starting to play the game. The next day, you're summoned to the longhouse before the sun's even fully up. The air inside is thick with wood smoke and the low murmur of voices. The chieftain is seated at the far end, his hand wrapped around a horn of ale, though it's barely breakfast. Around him are a half-dozen of his most trusted men and women, warriors, traders, and judging by the heavy gold neck ring, the settlement's wealthiest farmer. They wave you forward, and the chieftain begins. "You have skills," he says slowly, as though tasting the words. "Not like ours, but useful." You nod cautiously, still unsure whether this is the start of an opportunity or a public lecture. He gestures to a small table where a pile of goods has been laid out, a bent spearhead, a leather pouch with a hole in it, and an odd collection of wooden and bone tools. "These things are broken," he says. "We need them fixed. You do not fight well, but maybe you can mend what others break. This you can handle." Your brain jumps to all those DIY videos you've seen on YouTube, leather patching, simple carpentry, even basic metal repairs. You take up the spearhead, inspect it, and ask for a hammer and a flat stone. Within minutes, you've straightened the bent metal enough to be serviceable. You stitch the pouch with a bit of sinew, improvising a double loop to make it stronger. They're impressed, not because you're doing anything miraculous, but because you're doing it differently. Vikings are masters of their crafts, but they tend to follow tradition to the letter. You, however, keep borrowing little hacks from the modern world, double knots, diagonal stitching, using heat to slightly temper a blade. Small things, but noticeable. By the afternoon, people are bringing you other problems. A cracked water bucket, you suggest lining it with resin and fiber. A sled with a broken runner, you bind it with strips of soaked rawhide that will tighten as they dry. The work is tiring, but compared to hauling timber or rowing all day, it feels almost comfortable. Still, you don't let comfort turn to complacency. You remember those first awful days, when you nearly froze, nearly starved, nearly got skewered in the dark. That version of you didn't have options. This version has leverage, and leverage, you realize, is its own kind of weapon. One evening, while mending a torn sailcloth, you overhear two traders speaking in low tones about a journey south, to a coastal market where silver flows like water and rare spices can buy a man a year's comfort. You keep your head down, but your ears perk up. Historians still argue whether the Vikings traded more than they raided, but here, it's clear that commerce is as essential to survival as steel. If you can earn a place on that trip, you might gain access to goods or information that could change your position entirely, but that means proving you're not just useful in camp. You need to show you can handle yourself out there. That night, lying by the fire, you can't sleep. The crackle of the logs seems to whisper possibilities, markets, ships, silver, influence. You're no warrior, but you're starting to see a different path to power. One paved not with blood but with barter, cunning, and a few tricks the year 900 never saw coming. 2 mornings later, the opportunity comes. The traders are loading their ship, a broad, low vessel with a striped sail and a hull full of crates. The air smells of tar and salt. Gulls wheel overhead, shrieking at the promise of food. You've been hanging around the pier all morning, just passing by in a way you hope looks casual. The leader of the trade party, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel, spots you. "You," she says, jerking her chin. "You mend things. Can you mend sails at sea?" You hesitate for only a heartbeat. Yes. It's not a total lie. You can sew, you can improvise, and you've been memorizing knots like your life depends on it, which, at sea, it probably will. She gives you a long look, then tosses you a bundle of sailcloth and a coil of rope. "We leave with the tide. If you keep the ship together, you get a share. If you don't..." She lets the silence finish the sentence. You're on board by the hour's end, crouched between barrels of dried fish and bundles of fur. The deck is slick with seawater, and the oarsmen, broad-backed, quiet, pull in rhythm with the waves. The horizon is nothing but endless gray, and for a moment you feel a deep, primal fear. If this ship goes down, there's no Coast Guard, no life jacket, no GPS. But you push the fear down. Instead, you focus on learning. The traders speak in a rapid-fire mix of Old Norse and regional dialects, and you pick out words: silver, grain, amber. You watch how they lash cargo so it doesn't shift in the swell, how they read the wind from the ripple of the sailcloth. 3 days in, the weather turns. A gust tears a small but dangerous rip in the upper sail. The crew curses. Without it, their speed will drop, and if they're delayed, rival ships might reach the market first. You step forward before you can second-guess yourself. I can fix it, you say. They lower the sail, and you work fast. You use the crew's heavy thread, but add a trick from your memory, doubling the stitch and angling it so the strain runs along the cloth rather than against it. You even rub a little resin into the seam for extra grip. When the sail goes back up, it holds. The traders slap your back. One even mutters, "Not useless, after all." By the time you reach the market, a bustling shore lined with tents, smoke, and the briny smell of drying fish, you're no longer the strange one from nowhere. You're the fixer, the problem solver, the one who kept the voyage on time. And that's when you see it, a crate of something you never expected. Wheat. It's not much, but to a Viking settlement living mostly on fish, meat, and preserved goods, a steady supply of wheat means bread, beer, and leverage. You remember every history documentary you've ever watched. Food is power. In any era, your fingers tighten on the edge of the crate. You're not thinking about survival anymore. You're thinking about control. And for the first time since you arrived in this brutal, beautiful world, you start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, you could do more than survive. You could rule. You don't try to grab the wheat immediately. Only fools rush in when everyone's watching. Instead, you trail the traders through the market, pretending to be just another pair of hands unloading cargo. You listen. You watch. You learn who's buying what, who's selling to whom, and most importantly, who's hungry enough to make dangerous deals. The market is a riot of sound and smell. Roasting meat over open fires, salted fish piled high, the tang of smoke and the bite of unwashed bodies. Traders shout in half a dozen languages, haggling over furs, amber, honey, and weapons. And then you hear it, two merchants arguing over the wheat. "It's too risky," says the first, a big man with a scar over one eye. "Wheat rots if you store it too long. Stick to fish and meat. You can dry them, keep them for months." The second, a sharp-faced man with quick hands, shakes his head. "If you grind it, bake it, brew it, it's worth triple. People pay more for bread and beer than for a pile of dried cod." Your ears perk up. Bread and beer. Two things the Vikings have but not nearly enough of, especially in the colder months when fresh catches are rare and livestock is slaughtered to save on winter feed. You follow them at a distance, catching snatches of conversation, piecing together the gaps. By midday, you know exactly where the wheat will be stored until it's sold. A tent near the edge of the market, guarded only at night. That night, you don't steal it. You offer to guard it. It's risky because if they suspect you, you'll lose everything you've built. But the traders remember the sail you fixed. They know you're useful. And when you explain in your clumsy old Norse that you don't trust the drunk guards they've hired, the scarred man grins and tosses you a spear. "Fine," he says. "If you want to freeze your ass off, be my guest." You don't freeze, you plan. By morning, you've made a deal with yourself. You won't steal the wheat at all. You'll do something much more dangerous and much more profitable. When the traders wake, you offer them an idea. "I know how to keep wheat fresh for months, maybe a year." They laugh at first, but when you explain, keeping it dry with ash and sealed in airtight barrels, they stop laughing. "Where'd you learn that?" the sharp-faced man asks suspiciously. You just smile. Trade secret. Within hours, you've gone from lowly sailmender to someone with a share in the wheat deal. Not much, maybe a tenth, but in a world where food is currency, that tenth is a fortune. And that's the moment you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're starting to play the game, and you're winning. At first, your share in the wheat feels like a novelty, some extra bread, maybe a little beer. But as the weeks pass, you realize you've stumbled into the beating heart of Viking power. Control the food, and you control the people. It starts small. A fisherman wants to trade for bread because his catch has been poor. You agree, but only if he throws in a few lengths of dried cod. A woman making woolen cloaks offers you one for your winter guard duty. You agree, tossing her a small bag of ground wheat. Soon you're trading wheat you don't even have yet. You've got verbal promises, nods in the market, and people trusting that if you say they'll get bread, they'll get bread. You become the middleman. but not everyone likes it. One afternoon, while you're leaning against the wheat tent with your spear, a man you've never seen before steps out of the crowd. He's tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a bear pelt even though it's not cold enough for one. His eyes are pale, almost colorless. "I hear," he says, "you've been making trades you can't back up." You keep your face still, though your heart hammers. "Who told you that?" "Doesn't matter." He takes a step closer. "What matters is that wheat belongs to the market, not to you." You realize instantly this is a warning. Someone, probably one of the old traders, has decided you're too useful to kill outright, but too ambitious to be left unchecked. You could back down, apologize, hand over your little share and go back to mending sails. Instead, you say, "If you kill me, the ash and barrel trick dies with me, and so does your wheat." His pale eyes narrow. Then, to your surprise, he laughs, a short, sharp bark. "You've got nerve," he says. "Fine, keep your share, but don't grow too big, or someone will cut you down." He walks away, vanishing into the crowd. You don't move for a long time. That night, you think about his words, and you decide that if growing too big is dangerous, then you'll just have to grow fast enough that nobody can stop you. The next day, you make a deal with the brewers. Not just bread now, beer, because beer isn't just food. It's social glue. It gets you into feasts, into alliances, into the stories people tell by the fire. And once you're in the stories, you're no longer just a stranger from nowhere. You're part of the world, and that means you can start bending it. Beer turns out to be the real key, not because it gets people drunk, but because it gets them talking. The first time you bring a few clay jugs to the longhouse feast, you don't even pour it yourself. You hand them to the women who run the serving, and they make sure the right people get the first cups. Chiefs, ship captains, the old men whose words carry weight at the thing. You don't have a seat near the fire yet, but you've learned, influence isn't about where you sit, it's about where your beer goes. Soon, people start looking for you before the feasts. "Will you have more of that wheat beer?" "I'll trade you my brother's knife for a jug." "My cousin's wedding could use some." You start keeping track of who owes you what, not on parchment, you don't have any, but in your head, tied to little stories and favors. A jug of beer for a fisherman's net repair, half a jug for a warning about a raid, 3 jugs to the shipbuilder in exchange for letting you accidentally overhear which ships are headed where. It's not long before you realize you're weaving a net, not of rope, but of people. And like any good net, it catches more than you expect. One cold evening, as you're pouring beer for a merchant who came from far down the coast, he leans in and says quietly, "You know, there's a settlement 3 days from here that would pay well for your brewing trick, more than these people can pay." It's tempting. More silver means more wheat, more beer, more power. But leaving now would mean losing the roots you've just started to grow here. You tell him, "Maybe one day." Instead, you ask him something else. "What news do you bring from down the coast?" He tells you about a bad harvest, about a petty chief who's losing control, about a fight brewing over fishing waters. You file it away, because beer might get you into feasts, but information will get you into history. And for the first time since you stumbled off that longship, half-starved and half-frozen, you feel it. You're not just surviving anymore. You're starting to play the game. Your beer is no longer just a drink. It's a language. 1 jug says thank you. 2 jugs say I owe you. 3 jugs say we're in this together. The first alliance comes almost by accident. You're carrying a couple of jugs to the docks when you overhear 2 ship captains arguing about docking rights. The bigger man's voice is getting loud, and his hand keeps twitching toward his belt knife. You've seen that twitch before. It's the universal Viking prelude to something getting stabbed, so you do something bold or stupid, often the same thing. You step between them, holding a jug in each hand like peace offerings. "Before you kill each other," you say, "maybe have a drink." They laugh at you, but not in the bad way. And here's the thing, Vikings don't turn down free beer. By the time the jugs are empty, they're grumbling instead of shouting. The bigger one even claps the other on the shoulder and mutters, "We'll talk after the feast." Later that night, that same big man finds you. You kept me from making a mistake, he says. You've got my thanks. Thanks in Viking society is worth more than silver. It's a promise. You decide to test it. A week later, when a rival brewer tries to muscle in on your trade by claiming your beer is too thin, you ask your new friend for help. He doesn't argue. The next morning, the rival is seen packing his things for another village, muttering about bad fishing. Historians still argue whether the Vikings had a formal concept of mafia. You're starting to think they didn't need one, they just had you. And as your beer keeps flowing, so does the reach of your influence. Fishermen save you the best cuts. Farmers slip you extra grain after harvest. Even warriors, the muscle-bound celebrities of this age, start to greet you first at the feast. But you're careful. You don't swagger. You don't boast. You just make sure that when someone needs something, a message carried, a deal smoothed over, a quarrel cooled down, you're the one they think of. And then one evening, as you're wiping the rim of a jug, a woman approaches you. Not just any woman, the wife of the chieftain himself. "My husband," she says, "has heard of your beer. He would like to meet you." The game just changed. The chieftain's hall smells of smoke, sweat, and something faintly metallic. Blood that's soaked into the floorboards over years of feasts and fights. You've been here before, but never as a guest of the chieftain. Two warriors open the heavy carved doors for you. Inside, the long fire pit glows, sending sparks up into the rafters. Shadows of antlers, shields, and hanging nets flicker on the walls. The chieftain sits at the high seat, his back straight, a carved drinking horn in his hand. His beard is streaked with gray, but his eyes are sharp, measuring you the way a butcher sizes up a cut of meat. His wife steps aside, leaving you standing in the center of the hall. "You brew," he says, not a question. You nod. "I do. And you've made friends." His voice is slow, but there's weight in it. "Fishermen, farmers, even a few warriors." You say nothing. Sometimes silence is safer than agreement. He leans forward. "I could use a man who knows how to keep people content. A man who can smooth tempers and make alliances sweeter." There it is, the hook. And you know what comes next. "I have an enemy," he says. "A petty chief to the north who raids my trade routes. I want him, distracted, not dead, just too busy to trouble me." You could refuse. You could say you're just a brewer. But you've been here long enough to know that in Viking politics, refusal is its own kind of answer. Instead, you say, distraction is a kind of brewing. You just have to know the recipe. The chieftain smiles, not warmly, but like a man who's just realized his knife is sharper than he thought. That night, you sit at the high table for the first time. The meat is richer, the beer stronger, and the talk sharper. You listen more than you speak. You already have an idea. It involves a feast, a rumor, and a very special batch of beer. Because in the Viking world, you don't need an army to win a battle. You just need the right people to drink the right thing at the right time. The plan starts in the most ordinary place imaginable, the brewing shed behind your hut. To anyone watching, you're just tending to another batch of beer. But inside those barrels, you're fermenting more than barley and yeast. You're fermenting chaos. See, word has already been drifting northward about the clever stranger in the chieftain's hall. That curiosity is bait. You add the hook by sending a small cask of your finest brew as a gift of peace to the rival chieftain. It's not poisoned. No, you're not that reckless. Instead, you've spiced it with imported herbs you traded for from a merchant who didn't ask too many questions. These herbs don't harm, they loosen tongues. Add a little warmth to the blood, a little haze to the judgment. You know the rival will share it at his next feast. And when that happens, all you need is one more ingredient, a well-placed rumor. 2 days later, you send one of your fisher friends north with an innocent story to tell that your chieftain has been secretly offering an alliance to the rival's closest neighbor. By the time the beer is flowing and the herbs are kicking in, the rival will be surrounded by warriors whose minds are simmering with suspicion. Historians still argue whether Vikings used intentional psychological warfare in politics, but you're living proof that a well-timed suggestion can stir more trouble than a fleet of longships. The effect is almost immediate. Messengers arrive back in your village with tales of arguments breaking out at the rival's feast. warriors storming out, and alliances cracking like frozen river ice in spring. Your chieftain calls you in again, this time with that same knife-sharp smile, but now it's got something extra in it, respect. You've got a talent, he says. You make men fight without drawing a blade. You shrug like it's nothing, but deep down, you know what's happening. You're becoming part of the machinery that runs this place. You used to be the outsider who could barely catch a fish, the one who nearly starved on day 5 and considered eating whatever moved, including, yes, rats. Now you're the one steering the currents beneath the longhouse politics. And the best part, you're doing it with knowledge no one else here even thinks to value. That night, as you walk home under the northern stars, you realize something both thrilling and terrifying. You're no longer just surviving in the Viking Age. You're starting to thrive. Thriving in the Viking Age comes with a strange side effect. People stop questioning why you're here. The old women who once muttered about your soft hands now wave you over to share gossip. Young warriors bring you fish or game without being asked. Even the children trail behind you, curious about the way you can make fire without flint, or tie knots they've never seen before. But comfort is dangerous here. The moment you believe you're untouchable, someone will remind you that survival is always on trial. The reminder comes in the form of an early morning knock. It's not a polite knock either. It's the heavy, hollow thud of a shield hitting your door. When you open it, 2 men stand there. They wear no smiles, just thick cloaks and beards crusted with frost. "Come," one says. "The chieftain needs you." The hall is quieter than usual when you enter. Only a few people are inside, standing at the edges like shadows. In the center is a man you don't recognize, tall, scarred, and wearing the iron of a warrior who's seen too many battles. "This," the chieftain says, "is Einar, my cousin." The word cousin here feels less like family and more like complication. Einar doesn't sit. He looks at you the way a hunter looks at tracks in the snow. "I hear you can win battles without fighting," he says. His voice is deep and calm, like someone confident they can win with or without you. "I need that skill," the chieftain interrupts. "Einar wants to take a settlement far inland. The people there will fight hard. He thinks you can make them more agreeable." You realize this isn't a request. It's an invitation you can't refuse. The problem is, the settlement Einar speaks of is weeks away, across forest and mountain, and the people there have never even heard of you. Your tricks only work on those who care what you think. But you nod because saying no to a Viking with a battle axe is a short road to an unmarked grave. That night, you prepare for the journey. You pack what you can: dried fish, herbs, a few brewing tools. As you leave the village at dawn, following Einar's warband into the frost-covered wilderness, you can't help but think back to your first days here, when you could barely stand from hunger, when the idea of eating rats didn't sound insane. This time, though, you're not walking into the unknown empty-handed. This time, you're bringing a plan. And if you pull it off, your influence might stretch far beyond your own village. The journey inland is nothing like the sea voyages you've taken before. No gentle rocking of waves, no salty air, just endless white forests and the sound of snow crunching under boots. The warband moves fast, covering miles each day with the kind of stamina only people born to hardship can manage. You, however, quickly remember that while you've adapted to Viking life, your body is still shaped by the comforts of the modern world. By the 4th day, your legs ache like you've run a marathon in chainmail. By the 7th, your boots feel like ice blocks. But Einar keeps watching you, not mockingly, but measuring. At night, you warm your hands over the campfire and trade stories with the warriors. They laugh at your tales of iron wagons that run without horses and light without flame, though you notice Einar listening in silence. On the 10th day, the trees grow thicker, the snow heavier. The path narrows until you're threading through pine trunks like spears. That's when the scouts return with news. The settlement is close, only a half-day's march, but it's not undefended. They've set watchmen in the trees, archers hidden in platforms like silent birds of prey. The men around the fire discuss attack plans, burn the gates, cut down the lookouts, push through the center. You stay quiet, because you know if this turns into a fight, your role will vanish in an instant, and with it, the fragile safety you've built. That night you think of a different approach. Not a siege, not a slaughter, something that could make the settlement want to let you in. It's risky, though. If it fails, you'll be the first to die. By dawn, the snow is falling in thick curtains, and the war band waits for Einar's order. He turns to you. "Well," he says, "will you talk us inside, or do we cut our way in?" Every eye turns to you. The cold air smells like pine and steel. You take a deep breath. "I'll get you inside," you say. "But once I do, you have to let me speak first." Einar studies you for a long moment, then nods. The march resumes. By noon you see it. A wooden palisade bristling with spears, smoke curling from chimneys within. Shapes move along the walls, shapes that have no idea a stranger is about to knock on their gates with nothing but words and desperation. The fire in the longhouse crackles low now, throwing slow, lazy shadows across the walls. The smell of wood smoke and faint traces of roasted meat hang in the air, mingling with the sharper bite of the cold night outside. You're full, not just in your belly, but in that deep, warm sense of belonging that surprises you after everything you've stumbled through. The wind rattles faintly at the door, but here inside, wrapped in fur and heavy wool, you barely notice it. Your hands still ache a little from the day's work, but it's the kind of ache that promises rest will feel twice as sweet. You let yourself sink into the rough bedding, the woven blanket scratching lightly against your cheek. Somewhere to your left, someone is humming an old tune, half lullaby, half prayer. You don't know the words, but the sound settles into you like a slow tide. The flicker of the fire softens into a warm blur, and your thoughts wander, no longer in a rush to get anywhere. Out there, beyond the walls, the night holds 1,000 things: snow-dusted pines, frozen rivers, stars so bright they make the sky feel close enough to touch. But you don't need to reach for any of it. Not now. Your breathing falls into rhythm with the gentle hiss of the logs. You close your eyes. The cold, the hunger, the danger, all of it is far away now, tucked into yesterday where it can't trouble you. What's left is only the steady hum of safety, the comfort of knowing you've made it another day, another night. And here, in the soft quiet of the longhouse, the rest of the world can wait. Sweet dreams.